Greetings, MacNNers. I'm back. I haven't been fired or dead. No, I was just busy traveling, but now I am back and just in time for the Orlando Fringe and episode 64 of the MacNN podcast.
That whole fired thing is just close,
Close. Anyway, I'm in Orlando, Florida. It's great to be here, and we're having a fabulous time so far. Any of our listeners who are anywhere near this area, really, right now it's sort of cultural ground zero, so you need to come out. Over there in Washington, D.C., as usual, is managing editor Mike.
Hello.
And we have got, so much to talk about. I wish I'd made some notes about the last two episodes because I listened to them with you and Jordan, and you guys are great together, I just want to say. But also, I kept wanting to butt in. No, make this point as well.
Well, how awkward for you.
I felt helpless. So I'm very glad to be back in the saddle. I hope somebody missed me. But in the meantime, we have some great stuff to talk about this week. It has been a busy week, as usual. There's some very interesting new developments. But I want to start off with Cook and Crew. Captain Cook has sailed into the Indian Sea, apparently, and is taking over that country, making friends as he goes. It's really great to see the reception that he's getting. And this is just a little thing, but it was so exciting to me. Tim Cook has finally gotten to see his first cricket game. Now, for those of you who don't know, cricket is like baseball, only more boring, and takes a couple of days to play a really good game, but at least 5 hours. So picture that. Picture the world's busiest CEO taking time out and just sitting there watching hardly anything happen for hours on end.
I don't know about that. I mean, he's catching a little bit of heat for carousing, but this has got more to do with getting 4G implementation in India kickstarted, which needs less of a laissez-faire approach than the Indian government has been taking.
Yes.
And I think that's, other than the app centers that also conveniently opened while he was there, and the other one they announced are opening next year, I think that's his primary reason for being there, is to kickstart 4G.
Yeah. On Friday, we reported on an interview that he gave to the Hindu newspaper, and he goes into a lot of depth about this. And I thought he was refreshingly upfront in saying, yes, we'd like to sell some more products. But that is not the only thing we are actually interested in. We are actually interested in dragging this country's entire technological infrastructure up to par so that we can sell them more products. But,
And Apple will be in India for 1,000 years.
Well, we'll see. That's the kind of thing you say there. I'm surprised they didn't make him do a choreographed dance while he was talking about it.
Well, maybe they didn't. They just didn't report it that well.
Yes, this is the thing is that, yes, I think a lot of the press has pointed out that, he hung out with Bollywood actors and got a tour of a film set. He went to the cricket game. He did all these things. He also did a lot of business.
Yes.
Let's not kid ourselves. He's not there to golf. And to prove it, he brought along at least two other of the executives. I thought it was very interesting that COO Jeff Williams was there. This suggests to me that they are really talking serious logistics and like manufacturing sector, because that's Jeff's job. And so the fact that Jeff Williams was there tells me a lot. And the other one was Lisa Jackson, the Environmental and Social Initiatives Vice President. And this I thought was interesting too. We reported on her visit to a school that used iPads to teach women how to put together, mostly women, to put together solar lamps and to make their own businesses to improve their communities and so on. I thought it was great. But this is a head-on meeting between Apple executives, at least one of them, and that segment of the population of India that cannot afford an iPhone, right? The very rural community. They have poor connectivity, poor technology levels, and of course, they're very poor.
Well, they are, but I think that is trying to get a foot in the door for the shot down Apple phone refurb business that they wanted to get started in India. They were looking at selling phones for $50 and under, the equivalent of $50 and under in areas like that. And the Indian government said, no, you can't, because you're going to be offloading your garbage here. To which Cook responded that we stand behind everything we sell. I don't think there's going to be a lot of headway on that, though.
In the interview with the Hindu, he said flat out he's going to keep talking to them and try and convince them. And he is pretty persuasive. So I think under certain circumstances and with certain rules that are in place, I think he could possibly get his way. There's obviously going to be some flack from the local Indian smartphone makers, of whom there are several. But interestingly, in particular, something I don't think the press picked up on enough was that Apple and Cook in particular are trying to do an end run around those guys in a very clever way. They're going to the carriers in India and saying, you guys don't sell phones. You should sell phones. And if he can get them excited about that, that would really make for a major market upheaval in India. It's very clever.
And would be radically different than what they're doing now.
Yeah, radically different than what they're doing now. And that could also be the door by which he can sell lower priced phones. Again, that's going to be very dependent on the Indian government capitulating to some extent. But I think with the right amount of no product dumping rules, I think they'll be fine. The Indian government has agreed to let Apple open stores under their control in India. For those who don't keep up with this stuff, India is very big on made in India stuff. Even though they have a very high population, it's a relatively small world power. And so they feel very strongly that, like a lot of other countries, that they should encourage local manufacturers as much as possible. So they're very guarded about Western companies coming in and just taking over. Although the market leader there is Samsung. So much for that. The fact that Apple will be able to open Apple stores under Apple's control instead of Apple having to surrender the control to an Indian-owned company is a big step. And it does indicate that the government is willing to play with a little ball there.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah.
More importantly, I think this will give affluent Indians, and remember, there's a large number of them as well, middle class and affluent Indians. I think it will give them their first real taste of the full Apple experience. Because I always say the full Apple experience includes going to the store. You don't always have to buy your stuff from the store, but you should go.
Yeah, speaking of which, this last week was the anniversary of Apple retail in the United States.
That's right. And we are the luckiest company that we hired you, because since you have joined us, everything that has happened that has been of a huge note runs through that area.
I know. Isn't that great?
It's almost like it's your doing, but you are just down the road from store number 1.
I am 5.3 miles door to door.
That's amazing. Were you there close to the time that it actually opened?
I was not a lunatic and did not go the first week. I did not feel like wading through the crowds, and even still, I only go when I have to, but I do have some people there that I call from time to time when I need some data on things. So overall, I'm glad that they opened. As a funny story, the Apple dealer I used to work at, they had plans to open another location in Tyson's Corner, not in the mall where the Apple Store opened, but in the Tyson's Corner area. That probably wouldn't have worked out that well.
I can't remember if I was successful in doing it. I was. Did you see that I stuck a photo of Gary Allen?
I did see that, yes.
He passed away about a year ago, I guess. And I just thought it would be a nice way to remind us that he's sort of still with us. For those of you who don't know.
The famous video of Steve Jobs giving you a tour of the Apple Store was not filmed in California. It was filmed in Tyson's Corner.
Yeah.
And while the Tyson's Corner store is store number 2, numerically speaking, because of how time zones work, it was the first Apple Store to actually open in the United States.
Hey! So do you remember, Mike, what was the first thing you actually bought from the Apple Store there?
I don't, actually. I'm thinking about, my first thought was an iPod, but I ordered that refurb, and I ordered a 5 gig refurb. But they said, well, we're out of 5 gigs. Here, have a 10.
Nice.
So I want to say that it was the 1.25 gigahertz version of the eMac.
Oh, right. The best one.
Yeah.
That was the best one. Did I ever tell you the story about I watched a tech get thrown against a wall by an eMac?
That's not that hard. I can see where that would happen.
Yeah. He didn't unplug it before. Actually,
Didn't unplug it.
No, he had unplugged it, but he didn't let it discharge before taking the shielding off.
Yeah, that's the killer. Yeah.
We were lucky we still had him. That was a fun story. eMacs, just stay away from them, kids.
They're like greased pigs. There's no handles.
There's no handles. It's very difficult to get into. And as this guy found out, even unplugging it, you still have to let the electricity discharge from that CRT. Or surprise.
Truth be told, though, in 2016, if you're doing something with an eMac, you're probably doing something wrong.
Yeah, if you're doing anything with an eMac, that's true. Except you can take, there is one really good use for it. You take the back shell off, the plastic shell off, and and you stick it on your head and you're an astronaut. It's really cool.
I was about to say, you're going to be a stormtrooper, right?
That's true. It's a good beginning for a stormtrooper as well. How we got to this from India, I'm not sure. But the bottom line on India is that they are there to talk business. Yes, the press are going to want interesting pictures, beautiful colors, red dots on Tim Cook's forehead, that sort of thing. And yes, there's some pandering going on. Let's not kid ourselves about this. But it really does seem like Tim's onto something there, that he sees something going big over the longer term. This is the thing that I think the press gets consistently wrong all the time. Right now in China, it's a little bit of an economic downturn, so everybody's like, screw China, how about India? That's not really how Apple works, although it does look like that at the moment. As Cook said in the interview with the Hindu, our priorities and India's scaling up is happening at the same time. This is an alignment of mutual interests. And that's really what's going on. He sees a great opportunity in helping to bring 4G into that country on a large scale. Obviously, that's not just going to sell Apple product. It's going to attract talent to Apple. And as Tim has made a point of saying, India has tremendous amounts of talent.
Well, let's not forget that he was in China for a couple of days first.
Yes.
To talk to the Didi people, the ride-hailing service in China, which is actually, because of the cash infusion, looking at starting up operations in the United States.
I was going to say, I think I mentioned to you, Didi has an office in Victoria, BC.
Well, there you go.
It's not a ride-sharing service, so it's a car rental service because of the local laws. So they've got a hook. They've got a hook in Canada already, probably in other cities as well. So I was unsurprised to hear about the interest in the U.S., and they're likely to go public at just about any point now. That whole investment's going to be very interesting. Next up on the world tour, they are off to Amsterdam, opening a European business summit. And Tim's going to give a keynote, and there's going to be lots of wheeling and dealing over there. So this is really all about consolidating Apple's non-US presence, I think. And it is timely that this is all happening when Apple has topped $200 billion of cash that they don't feel like they can patriate over to the United States. So they've got a mountain of foreign cash and foreign countries that want some of it.
Yeah. I don't see where this is not in alignment with Apple's goals of, well, frankly, making money. This isn't holding up other projects. It's not like Cupertino is shutting down, waiting for the CEO to return. It's not like he can't supervise everything that's going on with modern technology. So the grousing that the fans and some of the press is giving about this, I don't completely understand.
No, I don't quite get it either. If the CEO's job is not to try and drum up more business, I'm not sure exactly what a CEO's job is. And as I say, he's bringing along people who are in charge of environmental initiatives. Don't forget, Apple has launched several environmental initiatives in China, may be doing the same in India pretty soon. I wouldn't be surprised. And then the head of manufacturing for Apple, Jeff Williams, is along for this trip. That should be telling you that these guys are seriously thinking of investing outside the United States.
Yeah, it's not 1972. I mean, Apple headquarters is only a FaceTime call away.
Right.
So this is not an Indiana Jones movie where it's going to take a slowly moving red line to get in and out of the country.
Yeah. Also, the mayor of Cupertino may want to pay attention to the fact that Apple seems to be more interested in investing in other countries, that are nice to him.
Yeah, you're not allowed to talk about that. You were having fun when we were going over that.
Yeah. I don't know how far he's managed to walk that back so far, but it seems like he was.
He tried, but no one really bought it.
No. Yeah. Well. Good luck with that statewide race, dude. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, welcome to the MacNN Rambly podcast. We made the change while Charles was gone. Let's see if he notices the shift.
Well, I listened very carefully to because I edited and produced those shows, so I listened a lot to the Mike and Jordan shows. And as much as I enjoyed them, yeah, you guys are all over the map.
Yeah, we are.
Anyway, so this segment we're calling, Finally, Something I Can Get Behind Out of Congress. There's a new bill, bipartisan effort, both in the House and the Senate, to put some limits on the FBI's power. Where did this come from? Wow, was that a breath of fresh air?
I wish I could say that it was going to help us in the long run, but it's really not. It's really just saying, yeah, that warrant you're supposed to get? Yeah, get that warrant. It is a toothless bill, as most of them are.
Well, yeah. But I think that even some toothless bills can make a statement. And I'm hoping that this will make something of a statement. And the statement, just the same way the NSA finally got told, look, guys, this has gone on long enough. I think that the mass surveillance has got to be scaled back. I think that the FBI is getting that same warning shot. we don't need to go into the whole issue. For those of you who have not tuned into previous podcasts, MacNN generally as a unit is pretty solidly against any efforts to weaken encryption or to outlaw encryption, as Cyrus Vance called for. That gave me a migraine. And of course, that was talked about in the previous episode, and I couldn't discuss it. But the bottom line here is that I'm a little more hopeful now, having talked to a bunch of people down here in the United States about politics generally, but also specifically about the encryption issue, that the public seems now pretty solidly behind the rationale for encryption and for privacy, and they even understand that there's a price to be paid for that privacy and encryption. And I still think they're on board with it pretty much. So there's always, of course, room for discussion and dissent, but I think that tide has turned in Apple's favor, and I think that the FBI have lost whatever momentum they may have had at one point thanks to their unbelievably clunky handling of this, and the Department of Justice ditto. It remains to be seen how these other court cases play out and all that, but I just feel like the momentum is gone from their side.
Well, the momentum is only going to take one podunk judge somewhere.
Yeah, or one serious threat. I have no illusions that Americans wouldn't change their minds in a heartbeat if somebody really did have a nuclear code. In any event, it would only take, I think, one serious threat to maybe revisit that issue, but I hope that people will keep putting pressure on Congress and keep pushing for encryption to be a part and parcel. As FBI Director Comey himself said, it's a useful tool. It's important in a variety of cases, not just your and my own personal stuff, but the government itself relies on encryption to keep its secrets safe.
My issue with the statement that terrorists are in heavy use of encryption is everything that we've seen, they're not. The Paris attacks,
right? Regular
SMS cell phone message.
Right.
They used no kind of encrypted communications, even though it was available in the build up to September 11th.
Yeah.
The ISIL people are open on public media, on social media. They have no problem speaking openly.
Yeah.
So I have no reason to believe that something like getting a nuclear weapon in the port of Baltimore or something like that is going to be hampered by encryption in any way. Is going to be, because it hasn't been up to this point. It with some very serious events that have happened before, and I think that it's going to be a boogeyman. I think that something's going to happen, and they're going to yell, "Oh, it's encryption's fault! It's encryption's fault!" The San Bernardino shooters,
yes,
the 5C, that this whole thing just got shaken out of the tree about.
Yep,
had nothing to do with it.
Nothing.
Didn't have a damn thing to do with it.
It had nothing on it.
But yet here we are. They shook it. Oh, it's terrorism. We need to make sure that there's nothing hidden on the phone. Blah 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 blah.
The cyber pathogen.
The cyber pathogen.
Man, I got to get T-shirts made.
Good times. Yeah.
I completely concur with you, and you guys raised a great point about this last time. But the one thing I want to add to that is, and this is the thing nobody seems to be thinking about, particularly people like Cyrus Vance and Director Comey, they really need to put more thought into this. And that is that if you weaken American encryption, you just push it offshore. You're not solving the problem. You're just making it worse. Not only that, but you're emboldening foreign governments to demand decryption for them.
Yeah.
That's probably a consequence you did not think through.
And that's not the FBI's job, though. I'm going to give them this one. The FBI's job is not foreign policy.
Right.
The FBI's job is not fostering democracy across the world.
No, but you'd think the NSA and the CIA would say, "Hey, guys, cool it," you know?
Yeah, well...
Anyway.
You're assuming that one branch of the government talks to another.
Well, and I'm assuming incorrectly that these aren't little fiefdoms who look out for their own interests only.
Oh, they exactly are.
Yeah, I know. Right. Speaking of education, though, let's move on. So we got this report that I think both IDC and Gartner put out reports that said basically that Apple's Mac share, even the portables, has gone down worldwide. Unsurprising because of the worldwide drought on PCs. So not particularly shocking, but the point that was teased out by a lot of the media was that the Chromebooks, Google has shipped more Chromebooks in the last quarter than Apple shipped MacBooks. You know, MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, MacBook. That's the generic term for all three of those products. This is maybe may be true. I'm going to assume that it is true, although Gartner and IDC do not have the world's greatest track record on this. But I can bring up another point about shipments versus actual sales being two different numbers very often. In particular, Apple has already said on the last call with analysts that they were reducing inventory on this, and that's because we're expecting a new MacBook Pro on or around WWDC, so that's very unsurprising. So all of this combines into what is probably a blip, an outlier. It's kind of a freak occurrence where the Chromebooks can ship. Google could simply just stuff the channel. I don't think they did, but they could just simply stuff the channel and claim that victory.
So let me see if I've got this right. We're comparing an average selling price of a $200 versus the average selling price of about $1,100.
Yeah.
And we're expecting the $200 to be less than the $1,100?
Well, this because analysts presume that education is a hugely important market to Apple, and it has been traditionally, and it is one that they value, but it is not the lucrative one that it was 2 generations back.
Well, no, it still is, but the problem is this is comparing Mac OS X to Chromebooks. It's not including tablets. It's not including the headwinds of iOS into education.
Yes, well, there's that too.
So they can say all they like that Apple's losing ground in education, but I think it's a steaming load of crap.
Well, it is, as I mentioned, because these shipment statistics, assuming that Gartner and IDC get them right, and you can clearly tell that they do not, because their numbers don't agree, sometimes by a huge amount. But just for the moment, we'll assume that they're correct. If Google is doing well with Chromebook, that's fine. Chromebooks are perfectly fine machines for certain uses. It's only when you stray away from Google products that that the Chromebooks begin to look kind of inadequate. And certainly, if you're spending $200 on a Chromebook or so, then you're certainly not going to get the level of service, you're not going to get the longevity, you're not going to get the resale value that you would from, say, a MacBook. So really, this market has room for both. And Google, I think, cares less about selling all this hardware and more about raising a generation of people to use Google Docs and use Google services and use Google. It's already a verb, for heaven's sakes.
So what? They're learning how to use Google services, which you can use just as fine on iOS and OS X and on Windows. It's fine.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why everyone's, this is a turning point. This is not a turning point.
No. If you were under that impression, let me correct it for you right away. Throughout the 90s, and indeed throughout the previous decade, Microsoft was the dominant force in education and has been since the 80s. So how did that work out for them? Yeah. See? This stuff turns on a dime, man, which is a lesson that Apple should probably learn as well. But this stuff turns on a dime, and the fact that our school children are getting indoctrinated into Google doesn't really mean a whole lot. That's the bottom line there. As I mentioned, in certain grades and for certain things, the Chromebook is actually a better value. Certainly for more advanced students who want to do more, then the MacBook becomes a better value. The problem has traditionally been that schools don't look at that. And the problem I used to run into, you probably ran into this too, and it may still be happening, but schools used to have completely separate budgets for computer purchases and computer maintenance. And so the one fiefdom didn't care about the other one. So they would buy the cheapest thing possible and ignore that ever-mounting repair bill.
Yeah, I'm not at the point where we're going to publish what I've got for the research on that. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and again, it popped up either last week or the week before, I forget which. But the school environments are radically different now than they used to be. And if you even have an IT department, they may not have any clue about repair at all. And all they're doing is handing you a new machine. And in many cases, they're just handing you a new machine as opposed to bringing it back someplace and taking it apart and figuring out what's wrong and putting a new board, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
That's just not what it's about anymore.
No, it's absolutely not. I think we are moving into, ironically, I think the Surface and the iPad Pro are actually helping schools move into a whole new era there. Ironically, since Apple didn't take the hybrid computer approach, I think from an education perspective, Microsoft took the correct decisions and may do very well with the Surface. I think the Surface is, at least from my perspective, if I had to rank the best value for the dollars spent, Chromebook would be third. I'm not sure who would be first. It might be the Surface, to be quite frank. But certainly those two iPads, Surface, pretty neck and neck at the moment. My other concern is exactly that problem. As you say, IT departments for schools no longer do repairs. They're not really suited for that. because these Chromebooks are so cheap, they do fail a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't have the exact statistics, but anecdotally, it seems to us from hearing from school administrators that they fail a lot. And because they're so cheap to replace, Google will just keep whipping out new ones as long as you want. But this is the approach Dell took, and it didn't work well for them.
One thing I am prepared to say is that shift that we were talking about before, from repair to just popping a new box open, that seems to have occurred much earlier than anyone gives it credit for. People are saying, well, it's Apple stuff, it's non-repairable, and that's what's caused it. I don't think so. It looks like this shift happened 2002 to 2004 in most places I talked to.
It would be interesting to correlate that with the rise of the bring your own device movement in enterprise.
I'm not sure there is a correlation to be made there. It would be more interesting to correlate it to when schools decided it was okay to let students bring their own.
Well, this is the thing, is did they make the same discoveries that enterprise made? And was it around the same time? I seem to remember that the whole BYOD thing did start just not quite 2002, but just a few years after that. So it has been about 10 years of that. And obviously that shift has been very beneficial for Apple in this case. We'll see how it plays out in education. But the bottom line, I think, is, in particular for education, you're not a strict business. Don't run it like a business. You need to look at value, and you need to look at where the students are.
And people looking from the outside also shouldn't consider that it's being run as a business either.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly the taxpayers. This just doesn't operate on the same principles, and nor should it. The values are a little bit different there. You can get, with the right group of students, maybe a particular skill set or a particular age level, whatever it is, you'll get huge amounts of mileage out of a MacBook Pro. With a different set of students and a different age group, perhaps, you'll get much better value out of a Chromebook. So it really does depend, is the answer. And there should be machines at different tiers for different needs. But I think the important thing that schools traditionally do not look at enough is value for money spent rather than just money spent.
I don't think it's the value is the issue. I think what schools are not necessarily looking at is how to adequately implement the technology.
Well, that's another area.
I think regardless of Chromebook or Apple, I think that there has to be a plan. I think it has to be implemented, and I think it has to be executed well. If you just throw the stuff out into the classroom, that won't do you anything. It won't do you any good.
Yeah, and you talked about this with Jordan about we had the Los Angeles school district, huge disaster, and the Coachella school district, singing success. Part of the reason for that was the direct involvement of Apple executives, but a lot of it was training the teachers. Some of them were very skeptical of this program originally, possibly because of the stories they heard about LA. But they got the training, they got an interested administration that were involved in matching what can be done with what technology would be the best to do it. And I think so far, it seems like they spent the money incredibly wisely.
I believe so as well.
Yeah. Yay, Coachella. Moving on. Speaking of value for money and reliability, once again, our friends at BackBlaze have done one of their annual reports. What's interesting to me about these guys is that they use consumer-level hard drives in an enterprise sort of environment, in an enterprise server environment, let's say. Mike, did you write the article about it?
Not this time. I wrote the two previous ones.
Can you summarize for us what they have found in the latest?
Well, the latest one, the trends are about the same. The C8s and the Western Digital drives are less reliable than the HGSTs and so forth. But what's the big takeaway from this one is that reliability has gone up in the drives over the last 2 years and not the other way across the board.
Across the board.
And while you can say that the Western Digitals are least reliable overall, it's still a very, very small percentage of drives that are failing. And here's the thing. Everyone has anecdotal stories about, I had all my data on an X kind of drive and I will never buy X kind of drive ever again because of it.
Oh, yeah.
What you should take away from this story is that the drives are safe, but they can still up and die on you at a moment's notice.
Yes, as I have said before, to me, hard drives, particularly the spinning hard drives, are like light bulbs. Light bulbs generally work and generally work for years with, set it and forget it regularity. But they could blow out at any moment.
Yep.
Including like the second day.
MacNN's advice on this is, as always, is to maintain reliable backups of your gear. How you do that is up to you.
Yeah, we've made some suggestions in that regard, but again, what works for you best is what works for you best.
There's actually not a lot more to say about that. The drives that a lot failed are failing at the same rates. The drives that not a lot failed are failing at the same rates. But just on the average, when you look at it as a composite whole, failure rates are down. And it's not because of anything that BackBlaze did any differently.
Yeah. I don't know if you know, but the company uses consumer level hard drives. I've never quite figured out why they do that, but I'm awfully glad they do because they have built this enormous database that is useful to consumers. But here's the thing that you should understand when you're looking at the results is that some drives they have 40,000 of, and some drives they have 2,000 of. And in those cases, you're going to get different failure rates than you would if all the manufacturers were equally represented. Now, our resident statistician, Mike, may have some thoughts about this. Is the fact that there's an uneven samples among the different drives affecting the results?
To some extent. If you're looking at a drive that's got like 20 drives in it, and there are a couple of capacities that they've got that, and one of them has failed, then you could say, oh, well, that's a 5% failure rate. But that's not a big enough sample to assume anything. Right. When the 20,000 to 3,000 comparison, I think a 3,000 drive population is sufficient to draw conclusions from that. Now, what I wanted to raise about this is, while yes, there are some statistical anomalies based on low populations, is people are complaining that, oh, you're in a vibrational data center, it's too hot, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But the thing is, it is universal across the tests.
Yes, that is a consistent factor.
That being the same, maybe it's accelerated the departure of the drives and maybe it hasn't. But the point is that all the drives are being exposed to the same stresses the whole time.
Also, one last thing I'll say about this is that the good news here is not only do consumers have a better tool for understanding which drives would, broadly speaking, be the most reliable and which ones may want to be avoided. A couple of years back, not at present, but a couple of years back, there was one particular drive at one particular capacity that had this very high failure rate. It was unusual even among that same company's other drives. And so I feel like this report being public like that puts enormous pressure on the companies that don't perform as well to do better. This has got to be an end result of good for consumers.
You're assuming they care.
Well, as you mentioned, across the board, the drives have gotten more reliable.
Yeah.
Maybe not as a direct result of these tests, but that publicity and that public awareness can't be hurting to get them to take it a little more seriously. So I think it's ultimately a plus.
Let's be clear here. We're not talking levels of service like the cable industry.
No.
For the most part, you're still looking at single-digit percentages of failures.
Yeah, they're actually, considering the technology behind the spinning hard drives, it's tremendously impressive.
And these drives are spinning constantly.
Yeah.
These drives are constantly, not necessarily under load, but the drives are spinning constantly. They don't go to sleep. 24/7, they're running, they're spinning. So
yeah. What I'll be very interested to see, and I'm sure we'll get this someday, is somebody doing a report like that about SSD drives. Because that's kind of an unknown. They're even more light bulby than spinning hard drives.
Well, let's do it. Manufacturer, send me 20,000 drives.
Mike will personally take care of this. And you know what? He can. But I'm very interested in it because although the reports that I've heard about SSDs failing are fairly uncommon, so fairly rare, but when they go, they just go.
Oh, it's just done. You don't get a chatter. You don't get anything like that. It's just, hey, where's my drive?
Yep. Boom. Gone. And absolutely no warning whatsoever. So it's a little terrifying, but it just reminds you, hey, backup. You still need to do backups. And of course, the irony is that I think I speak for most people, their backup system is an external drive. That external drive is probably a spinning hard drive because of the enormous capacity. So that's how I'm backing up my SSDs right now. We've launched a new column. We've launched a couple of them. One of them is a very time-limited one. A 2-week trial is exactly that. It was a 2-week trial. Mike has spoken about it on previous episodes, but we have just last week published the conclusion of this particular trial. Mike, I wanted to ask you about this. The conclusions are in the article, and ultimately, no spoiler alert here for regular listeners, you appreciated the Apple Watch a bit more, but it's still not quite for you. Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, that simplifies the issue somewhat. There are limited circumstances where I appreciate having it, but I'm awake and it's not on my wrist.
Yeah, there you go. Hopefully it's not in a drawer someplace.
No, I have a nice little wood charging stand over here that it sits on.
Oh, good. I use mine as an alarm clock as well. So,
well, again, that's what I use my phone for.
Yeah, that's true. And yes, the phone can be an even more effective alarm clock. But I kind of like the, in the middle of the night, I wake up, I'm kind of bleary-eyed, I can just tap the watch, the green LED alarm mode shows up again.
As opposed to murdering your face with a phone?
Right. Well, the phone, I have to take it off the stand, finger the Touch ID button, and then I get, you're right, moon tan. But it doesn't immediately come up with the time, because especially if you've just woken up, trying to read the time at that top menu bar, it's not going to happen. So, yeah. And as you can tell from my hemming and hawing, I do this every morning. What time is it? What? No, I can sleep. Okay. Wait.
See, I have 3 alarm clocks. They're called children.
Yes. Unfortunately, they can't be set very well.
No, the time that they wake is not relevant. It's just the time that they wake. Is it light outside? No. Okay, go back to bed.
I'll bet that on Christmas morning, it's 10 times worse.
No, they're not really Christmas kids. They're, it's the day like any other.
Really?
Yeah, I know. I was surprised too.
Oh my God. It was a huge ritual that my parents hated at our place.
Well, I'm going to give it a couple more years on that. I think another 2 years. I think it's going to be a thing.
Yeah, that's true. Your kids are pretty young. So the 2-week trial, we're going to try this with some other stuff. And that brings me to my question. You have mentioned on previous episodes or in work chat about what you have in mind for poor William.
Yes, poor William. He's next.
And maybe poor Malcolm, for that matter. But you have not mentioned anything about poor Charles.
No, I have not as of yet. We're going to see how the series goes after a couple of iterations, and we're going to go from there.
One thing I did want to mention about the name 2-week trial, this is also, at minimum really, our review policy as well. Unlike a lot of other sites, and I'm not trying to say that we're superior, but in this area, I think we are. I just did say that, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
Very cunningly done.
We tell, companies will send sites like us stuff to review. And very often they will say, particularly if it's an expensive item, we need it back, when you've done the review. And there's usually a time limit on that, pretty hard time limit in some cases. We always write back and say, you know what, we've got to hang on to this for a while. Even if you want it back, we have to hang on to it because part of our review, a component of our hardware reviews, is how do we live with it? We even have a column specifically about this, living with, that goes on, here's how this Yeti microphone has been performing for me after the first year or after 6 months.
Yeah, the living with is on the rare occasion that we can do that as opposed to having to return a review product right away.
But we do like to ask for at least 2 weeks because particularly when you're evaluating something like, let's say, a backpack or a briefcase, you'll find out real quick whether it's well made or not, but you won't find out in one weekend.
Yeah, you won't find out in 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, you've got to have a couple of weeks with this thing, particularly once it's integrated into your daily routine. Sadly, I need pretty tough stuff because I carry my equipment with me everywhere. I have all of my computer and iPad and all that stuff, iPhone, everything like that with me here in Florida. I could have brought the iPad except for this podcast, basically. But, I needed it for some work stuff, too. So it really, this is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. And you really do find out whether something's well built or whether it was just designed to look pretty and won't last. I've got a headphone set right over here that I'm evaluating. And so far, I love the headphones. But this case that they came in, this little carrying case, is going to get filthy. I'm telling you right now, it's just going to get filthy. Now, maybe the makers are like, well, but that was the idea so that the headphones don't get filthy. But the headphones are going to get filthy too because I'm a filthy person. No. It's so far it's been great, but I worry about that case getting dirty, and that is going in the review. Back
to the original point. The point of the 2-week trial series is we have a tendency to like what we like and stick with it.
Yeah.
And all of us, including you, our dear listener, should periodically try and broaden our horizons technologically.
Move out of your comfort zone a little.
And if for no other reason, to see what it's like on the other side of the fence. And during this time period, you should keep an open mind about it.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing I so admire about Mike. He went into this with an opinion. And the 2-week trial changed that opinion somewhat, so he learned something about it, but he gave it a completely fair shot.
It revised my opinion of the device.
Yeah. And in this case, it was the Apple Watch, and the Apple Watch simply isn't for everybody. I love the point you made that, you weren't a watch wearer beforehand, so that was already a strike against it. Jordan's made the same point. He doesn't really wear watches. I didn't wear watches until I got one, and I have to be frank and say that originally I wore it because I'd received it as a gift, and there was no way I was not going to wear it around them. Same with your sweater from your Aunt Lavinia. But I grew into it, you might say. And so now I wouldn't take it off, even if I could. Well, I can take it off. All I have to do is bring this magnetic clasp in the proximity of anything else metal, and that's what happened. But anyway, I like that the series talks about, and we'll put those of us on staff here, out of our comfort zones a little bit. What was that one that you were thinking about doing on William? Was it an Android tablet?
No, actually, it's not an Android tablet. It's a iOS-compatible Android smartwatch.
Oh, yes, he does love his Apple Watch.
Yes, he does.
You're such a cruel man. But of course,
I know.
He has a second wrist. He doesn't have to take off the Apple Watch.
He could roll 80s style and have multiple watches on one wrist.
Given William, I think he would like.
Well, what's the rule? If you're around for the first time in the fashion statement, you probably shouldn't do it later.
Yeah. But the other thing I love about this series is that now that you've mentioned that this is going to be going on with the other staff, they are all terrified because our weaknesses.
Well, part of being a good leader is maintaining the rule of order through terror or whatever have you. So I'll stick with that.
It's true. So that's 2-week trial. The other column that we just launched just on Friday was technically speaking. Our readership are very smart people for the most part. They are very professional for the most part. But we do also have readers that I think we may be, flying over their heads sometimes with certain tech terminology that comes into play suddenly, like with the FBI case. We suddenly learned about salting and hashing. A lot of people barely have a handle on exactly what encryption actually is. I mean, they know what the end result of it is, but what does it actually do? How is it actually accomplished? And then you throw in these other things. Salting is something you do to caramel and ice cream to make it delicious. So we needed something that would explain exactly what these terms mean in cryptology. So William Gallagher took the helm on that, and he did a beautiful job of explaining exactly what encryption is and how it works, exactly what hashing is and why that's not quite the same, and what salting is, which is, as you might imagine, something you sprinkle over the top of your hashed encryption, like a souffle. I know, it's the first time encryption has ever been compared to a souffle.
And you as a MacNN reader can look at this and say, yeah, whatever, I already know this. But you have family members that don't.
Yeah.
So this is something that instead of rolling your eyes so hard that you can see the back of your head, you can say, okay, well, here's about 500 words talking about it.
Yeah. Listen, I've got a Macintosh user group that I talk to, and some of the members there don't understand, and I don't blame them. They don't understand what a terabyte is in relation to a gigabyte, except that it's bigger.
Okay.
Right? And really, that's kind of the key takeaway. But some of them would very much appreciate knowing exactly how much bigger and what's beyond that, and why do we keep needing more storage.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to delve into the metrics of hard drives or anything like that.
No, but it's an example of a term that we hear all the time. And we can even use it intelligently in conversation, but we don't actually know the specifics. All of us can drive a car, but very few of us know the principles of internal combustion.
Okay, interesting analogy.
You know?
We seem to keep coming back to cars and parking garages.
I know. Well, I grew up in the 80s, and that was all we had back then to compare computers to was cars. So I always go back to it. So check out, technically speaking, what we'd really like, and the reason we're mentioning this is because we'd really like suggestions on areas like this that could use some clarification, some specificity. As I say, we use a lot of these terms broadly all the time, but even the people who use them don't always know the exact specifics. So if there's an area where we can clarify that, we'd be very, very, very happy to do so.
Oh, yeah. We're going to go over a lot of different stuff in the column. So if there's something you wanted to read about earlier or something that you've got people suffering with and you really can't explain it, well, let us do it for you.
Yeah. And the best part is that once we've done the article, you can always link back to it and just, so the next time your mom calls up and says, explain to me the difference between storage and RAM again, click, zing.
Yeah, that is on the list.
Yeah. And also, we're going to, once and for all, this is already dying out. It probably doesn't need much help from us. But once and for all, we are going to stamp out the use of the word tape when they mean disc.
I don't think that's stampable. I don't think there's going to be that much to do about that. Yeah.
All right. Very good. Speaking of William Gallagher, it's time once again for App of the week. William Gallagher comes in from his little cubicle there in Birmingham and tells us all about the app that most impressed him or distressed him. And so this week, William, we want to know, what is your app of the week?
There's this weird thing about this particular app of the week. I've been using it, well, obviously all week, but also I've been using it for years. Certainly once a week, every week, sometimes several times a day. Yet I completely forget that I've got it at all. Hazel works in the background on your Mac. It moves things, it tidies things, it renames. Actually, when you say it, it doesn't all sound that very exciting, but it's oddly thrilling when you use it. And it is always so immensely useful that you'd think Apple would include it on every Mac. Examples. That's the best way to explain Hazel. Examples. I work on MacNN's other podcast, One More Thing. And after, you work on this and you record it, you've got several audio files. One comes from my co-host, Malcolm Owen. One's from my own microphone. One is a combined recording from Skype, all this sort of stuff. That combined recording is in my audio hijack folder when we're done. Malcolm's and mine land in my Dropbox folder. Hazel sees them all. It automatically moves that podcast audio out of Dropbox and into the folder where I work on the latest episode. It doesn't do the same with the audio hijack recordings because I've got loads of those. I can't have Hazel automatically move the lot. But what I can do is click on the new audio that I've just recorded, tag it green, and the moment I do it, Hazel grabs it and moves it. It's not like moving this audio stuff around is arduous, but now it just happens. I don't have to think about it. I switch on, I go to the folder where I want to do some work. Everything I need is there. Try this though. I'm freelance, so I write invoices. I write them in Pages, and when I save a copy in PDF to my desktop, Hazel immediately sees that. Sees that it's a PDF, sees that I've named it in a particular way, happens to be my initials followed by the invoice number, and that's always in a certain pattern. And it just copies that straight away to my invoices folder in Evernote, my notebook in Evernote, and to my invoices backup folder in Dropbox, which is shared with my financial manager. All of that happens before I've come out of Pages and gone to my desktop to drag that PDF onto an email. And tomorrow, Hazel will see the PDF is still there on the desktop and it will delete it for me. I choose what it does. I choose when. But then, you do it once, you forget all about it. All I know is that I've got copies of all of this stuff. My financial manager has automatically got the latest copy of everything. Hazel 4, the new version that came out now, it does add new things you can do. It adds also new ways you can preview what it will do when you run one of these rules, as they're called, and that's really handy. But otherwise, it's what you want is the original app. These are very good additions to a very superb app. And actually, if all the new version did was remind you that the old version existed, that'd be fine. Hazel 4, $32, direct from noodlesoft.com. Just go buy it now.
Well, that about wraps it up for episode 64 of the MacNN podcast. Managing editor Mike over there in Virginia.
I'm supposed to say something now. Excellent. Hello or goodbye, I guess this is appropriate.
Well, I just thought maybe you had a concluding thought.
It's been an interesting week. This entire year has been a little bit different than anything we've ever had to report about Apple. We are reporting on Apple from the top of the heap as opposed to climbing the ladder.
Yeah.
And things are changing. Things are changing for the company and things are changing for the user base. And I understand that things may not be going exactly the way you want it to go.
No.
But the company is healthier than it's been. Yes, we're all deciding that Apple needs to do something a little bit different, and even we have our own opinions about that. But we would hope you that would stick around with us through this transition, which I don't think is done yet.
Oh, yeah.
I think that we're probably looking transitionally at least the rest of the year, maybe even next, before we settle into a new standard.
Yeah. If this is a tunnel, I think we're closer to the beginning of the tunnel than the end of the tunnel.
I think so, too. And let's figure it out together.
In the meantime, we've got, so many iPhone 7 rumors to deal with now. They're like roaches. We just got to keep squishing them one at a time.
It is the season. It is the season.
And coming up soon is the Worldwide Developers Conference. There'll probably be some announcements just before it. We certainly expect some more software updates and things like that. And then we might get some hardware updates. We'll have to see what comes out of it. We might get some surprises. I always like it when that happens. So it looks like it's going to be a very fun late spring for Apple and us. And then on through the summer and then into the fall, which is when the really big excitement happens. But I think we'll be able to keep this entertaining right through the summer. Oh, hey, you guys, before we go, because Memorial Day falls on a Monday this year, there will be no episode of the MacNN podcast on that Monday. And as long as we're planning ahead and you've got your calendars out and everything, let me also let you know that July 4th falls on a Monday this year, so there will be no episode of the MacNN podcast on the July 4th weekend. Enjoy your holidays, and as always, thanks for listening. In the meantime, on behalf of the entire staff of MacNN and William Gallagher, who comes in and contributes to our show, I never remember to mention it. So this week, I'm remembering for once. William and Malcolm do their own podcast, and it's called One More Thing. They cover stories from the beginning of the week, and we cover stories towards the end of the week, which you then hear on Monday. Their podcast, Terribly Entertaining, comes out every Thursday, so give that a listen. It's a nice 30-minute chat. And, of course, we regular MacNN podcast about an hour's worth, roughly, of all the latest tech news and where it's all going.
And their podcast is oh so very British.
So British, in fact, that we're lining up Tetley as a sponsor. Really more like the Daleks as a sponsor, but never mind. I'm Charles Martin. I'm the editor of MacNN. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Goodbye.